Alrighty, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Countless Vlogcast, episode 43, with my guest Allegra Pescatore, author. I'm gonna bring it right in, guys. So get ready.
Hi,
All right,
folks.
how you doing, Allegra?
I'm doing real well this evening. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. So tell us a little about yourself.
Well, I am a fairly new author in the fantasy block. I live in Pennsylvania. I come from Italy originally, which is why I have the long Italian name. And I write epic fantasy and a whole lot of other stuff, and I can't wait to get into it.
Okay, great. So when did you start writing, and how long have you been writing for? Like, first talk about like when you started writing, I guess as a kid or teenager, and talk about professionally after.
Absolutely. So actually, my whole household has been kind of having a joke. I turned 29 in 2 days, and I started writing when I was 8. So my book and my characters turned 21 in a very real way this month. So I've been writing for a while. I started out as a kid. I was just scribbling in notebooks. I couldn't read or write in English, so I was doing it in Italian and very, very broken phonetic English. I cannot read what I originally wrote, and I bless my parents for struggling through it. But I debuted with Where Shadows Lie, my epic fantasy novel, this March, right when COVID hit and everyone went into quarantine. And I had been writing with the intent of publication for probably 3 or 4 years before then. After college, I started thinking more seriously about how I wanted to be published and what path I wanted to take. And when I found the indie author community, it really cemented that it's something I could do and that I wanted to do. So
Okay, great. So what is the genre, your special genre that you write it, and then how did you discover that? How did you fall into that?
So I know everyone suggests find a genre, stick to it, keep going there. I am absolutely incapable of doing that. I do definitely write fantasy, science fantasy, all speculative fiction, but Where Shadows Lie, my debut, is high fantasy. I'm working on an arcane punk science fantasy pirate heist adventure. I'm playing with fairies. I do a bit of comedic writing, jump all over the place.
Okay, great. So let's talk about your recent book, like the title and the backstory of the book.
Of course. The title is Where Shadows Lie. It's a book that I have been playing with since I was 8 years old. The characters have really grown up with me. It is the story of what happens after the chosen one accidentally dies, and everything is thrown into disarray. Characters who never should have been brought into the spotlight have to step up and become the new heroes, and it's also very much about a book about discovering your own internal biases and trying to do better than what you have before. The main character's journey is one of realizing that she's made a lot of mistakes and accepting the consequences of them and moving towards becoming a better person.
Okay, great. So what inspired you to start writing that book, and what was like the process like?
So I started with playing with little like Playmobil and Lego figurines as a child, developing characters. I then moved on. When I was teaching myself to read and write English, I would RP on forums and go back and forth and develop characters and practice writing. And I got very fast at writing over the years doing that. And so I would write other things, write novellas for NaNoWriMo, go all over the place. But I'd come back to this story. It's been with me almost my whole life. And the characters kept drawing me in. And then a dear friend of mine passed away. He was an early fan of my work. He helped me develop a lot of it during our teenage years. And after that, I knew I had to take it seriously. So I sat down. I had at the time, 300,000 word draft that was absolute garbage. I threw it all away. I wrote it again, and I threw that away. And I wrote it one more time and then cut it in half. And finally I had a book.
So what's like your process of like like writing? Do you have like a blank sheet? Do you like brainstorm? Do you go for walks? Like what's your process like?
So my co-authors would tell you that I am absolutely rigid and obsessed with my spreadsheets and color coding everything. That is not entirely correct. I really, really like to have an idea of where I'm going. I tend to make scene maps with a brief description of every plot point that I need to hit, because my books tend to have a lot of intrigue. And so keeping all those, balls in the air is difficult. But no battle plan survives the first encounter. My plotting sheets tend to have about 1,000 tabs where it's like version 1 and then version 87, and they have nothing to do with each other. So by the end of a novel, I have no idea where I went.
Okay, great. So it's like I ask this question to a lot of authors and artists too. What makes you unique and separates you from other what other authors too, without being too humble?
Okay, without being too humble, I work very well with others. Most of my work has been collaborative. I know this is not particularly common, especially in like the big, chunky epic fantasy genre. I, from the beginning, have found that my writing is strongest when I'm playing off of other authors and when our ideas kind of can synergize. So whether it be for Where Shadows Lie, where I am the only author, but I have DM'd tabletop games in the setting with friends to punch holes in my world building and push it further. And I've had people the whole time like giving me ideas and helping me think through things, all the way to my current series, which is a whole bunch of novellas, and there are 4 authors plus involved. We all work together, and we are exchanging, places line by line. I'll write one line, they write the other line. We're all on chat together. It's a very unique and very fun and engaging process, and I think that it is definitely one of my strengths, is helping other writers get there.
Great. So talk about your influence in terms of authors that influence you when like you aspire to be like growing up and to like now, like present authors you inspire you.
Well, growing up, my father, he read to me every single day. My mother did too, but he was kind of the driving force. We didn't have TV, so every day during breakfast and dinner, he would read to me. And when I was 2, he started me on The Hobbit, which does seem a little young, but he paraphrased it all and read the entire thing to me and then read it again without paraphrasing anything. So Tolkien was my first love. We moved through Narnia and all the other kind of classic mainstays of fantasy. When I started reading, I taught myself to read English because I had to read the next Harry Potter book, and he wasn't reading fast enough. So I moved into kind of Harry Potter, a lot of young adult fantasy. But my real kind of coming into my own, discovering what I liked as a reader, was in my late teenage years and 20s, discovering Brandon Sanderson, John Scalzi, Tamara Pierce, Mercedes Lackey. I have a love for harder magic systems, and while I love the kind of mystical, softer magic systems like Narnia, there's something just, I like the crunchy. I like to know what the economics of a world is. I like to know exactly how a magic system works. So they were all very influential in kind of showing me what's possible.
Great, great. So do you have a publisher, or do you self-publish your books? And another part 2 question would be, if you self-publish, what is your method of like branding and promoting yourself?
Of course. I do self-publish. I'm starting my own little publishing house, and there's going to be more of us publishing through it. But for now, it is just me. It's AO Collective Publishing. And I decided to self-publish because I like to write big books, very big books. I write a lot. And for years, I was completely convinced that I would never be published because of it. And then I discovered indie fantasy, and suddenly these were the books I wanted to read. So I felt much more confident in writing them. As far as how I'm branding myself, I'm still working on it. I've only been publishing for about 6 months. I'd like to say that my brand is for fairly diverse fantasy. My characters are main character in Where Shadows Lie is a disabled woman. I really try to instill as much of the modern values that I love into my fantastical worlds as I can. I'm just not into the, everyone in the cast is monochromatic and the same. And that is, even though I jump genres, that I think is the thing that I stick to, is diverse kind of genre bending work.
Okay, so when you're writing your books and have your audience in mind, do you write for the audience? Do you write for yourself, or do you write hoping that they'll get what you're trying to portray?
I'd say that in the end, I write for myself. I can't stop writing, so there must be a driving force in there, but I do definitely think about what an audience would want. If I'm writing a romance, it's going to have a happily ever after. If I'm writing fantasy, it's going to have big epic scenes and dragons and magic. So I do like to maintain some genre standards. But I love playing with tropes. I love dangling them in front of readers and then pulling the plug. My Where Shadows Lie, beginning with the chosen one dying. So I hope that the audience will get what I'm trying to play with. And so far, it seems to be the case. I've had some really wonderful reviews, and people have been enjoying the books. So hopefully it continues.
So in this first, who's your audience? In terms of demographic, age, and gender, I guess I would say too.
I say that I probably am writing to a fairly, definitely adults. I don't do YA. There's a bit too much cursing in my books for it to be YA. Adult, fairly liberal, fairly anyone who likes the works of Mercedes Lackey or Tamara Pierce. I try to hit those kind of things. Character-driven fantasy that is a little humorous, a little fun, but try to have some feels.
Okay, great. So let's talk about the present time too. I've already been in quarantine now, so has it affected your creativity, and what are some of your present goals?
Very much. The first few months, I had a writing schedule and just flew out the window. I couldn't concentrate on a single thing. I'm immunocompromised and disabled, so it was terrifying. As we've gotten more settled into it, I haven't left the house except for the occasional grocery shopping since March. I've definitely noticed that my creativity is less on a schedule. I can't just sit down and write. I need to take it when I can get it. So I've been writing, I started a book in May, and my co-author and I wrote 80,000 words of it. And by the end of May, we hadn't expected it. We didn't have a plot for it. We just did, because that's what we had to do.
Great. So what's been the feedback so far from your books, though? What's been the favorite and I don't want to say least favorite, but I'll say least favorite, of all your books?
Well, I only have one out currently, but so far it seems to have a niche audience that likes it. I've gotten some good feedback from the disability community, having a main character who is disabled on page 1 and still disabled at the end, and her disability doesn't magically vanish for plot-related reasons, has definitely, I think, gotten some good publicity. And I'm hoping that when my next book comes out in September, I'll kind of break into a different market. It is fast-paced, adventurous, funny, completely obscene. I think it will appeal to a lot of people who kind of like the more edgy, almost science fantasy side of fantasy.
Great. So since you've been writing for a few months as professionally, though, do you have any advice for those starting out too, especially this time?
So you sent me these questions and I thought about it, and I actually don't want to give advice from me, My parents are both professional artists. I grew up in a house that was completely, dependent on them making ends meet as artists, as creative people. And my father's favorite motto is the creative act is an act of desperation. He got it from his teacher and he kind of raised me with it. And I think it's absolutely true. You do your best work, or at least I do, with my back is against the wall. When we all, lost our jobs, that's when I knew I had to make this work. And my writing output keeps going up every time I do. Every time I set myself an impossible deadline, even if I don't meet it, I've done more than I would have. So that's the advice I would give, is push yourself as far as you can every single day, because that's the only way that you will consistently create. There are just too many excuses and too much procrastination in the world not to be desperate to create.
Okay, great. So what's your next project you're working on? Just give us a little snippet of that. Not too much, but just a little bit.
Of course. The next book that's coming out is called NaCl, Eye of the Storm. It is a world where the gods tried to create the perfect world and forgot to create any salt. So the entire world is devoid of salt. People are dying, and the only source is this giant mountain in the middle of the ocean controlled by one corporation. And the main characters are a group of pirates who are out to blow it up and try to redistribute the wealth.
Okay, great. Sounds like a cool story.
It's bizarre and fun.
So let's not get too much of that. That was great. So people look for that book in the future. So I'd like to end this with a positive message from you to the world out there. Any to share?
Sure. I would say that we are in a time when reality is bleak, but also very hopeful. And if there's something that you've always wanted to do that adds joy or value to the world, or sheds light on an issue you care about, do it. There are ways. I never saw myself, or very rarely saw myself, in the fantasy that I loved and the books that I loved. So I wrote fantasy with a disabled protagonist. There's something that everyone cares about, and it should be out there.
Okay, great. So what are your tags, like your website and Facebook, Instagram, all that, and Twitter,
Sure.
too, that we can find you?
I'm Author Allegra almost everywhere. My parents always said I'd love my first name eventually when I was moaning and groaning about it as a child, and they were absolutely right. So yeah, you can find me as Author Allegra. I have a website, Facebook, Twitter. I'm fairly active everywhere. I'm currently lurking on Reddit, where Shadows Lie is the resident author book club pick for the month of July. So feel free to join the conversation and join the fun.
All right. Thank you, Allegra, for coming on and sharing your story and sharing your experience. So that's great, though, too.
Thank
so
you for having
people will
me.
support you and go follow her on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Look for her books. She's been read for 6 months, but it's been great, guys. So thank you guys for watching. This has been episode 43 of Comics Vlogcast. Thank you, Allegra, for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
All right, I'm out. Peace and blessings, everybody.